In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern. We do have tons and tons of frigid air moving into the central and eastern United States for really the end of this week into next week. We're going to be discussing that over the course of the entire video today. We're also going to be discussing some pretty significant snowfall for areas along the Gulf Coast, areas along the southeast coast, and maybe even up into the mid-Atlantic. It's still kind of up in the air, no pun intended, on if we're going to see some really northerly extent to that snowfall or not. So we're going to be watching it very, very closely. But let's just dive into things. We'll be looking at multiple models today, even showing you guys the Canadian model. So we're going to be taking a look at 3 different models to kind of add some opinions in there, since we have such a big split in some of the forecast, at least not the temperatures, but mostly the extent of that snowfall as we were discussing. Let's take a look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, and this is going to be for the 24th through the 28th of January. You can see that a lot of cold air is going to be spreading towards the west, and if you guys have been listening for a long time, you know that typically cold in the west would point towards a little bit warmer in the east, and I think that we're on our way into some of that becoming a lot more common, and that's really, really unique. Not if you look back at the past 5 years, but if you look at this year, this winter overall in the fall, that is been very rare and very hard to come by. So moving into a little bit of a interesting pattern compared to what we've been dealing with. Let's take a look at the precipitation, actually, and we do see quite a bit of that throughout the southeast. We see the Rockies and the Plains dealing with some above average precipitation. Nothing too crazy here. Everybody's pretty close to normal for that time period. But when we look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, we see they're a little split on this. We see cold kind of across the board. I would say they're pointing more towards cold in the west, and likely that would mean a little bit warmer in the east. But I think they're keeping their kind of like the door open for either solution at this point. Precipitation, it looks pretty similar. Again, nothing too significant in either direction, either below or above. It's kind of just neutral. So a little bit of a up in the air forecast here as well. Now, as we take a look at the 3 to 4 week outlook, this is for February 1st through 14th, we can see that pattern change fully takes place here according to them. We see a southeast ridge setup, which brings in warmer temperatures for the southeast and mid-Atlantic, colder in the north central. Precipitation-wise, getting above average for the east finally, as well as the northwest, and then a little bit drier for the southern states. As we take a look at the past 15 days, we can see it has been frigid in the east overall. I mean, this is significant temperature departures. In the dark blues, we're talking about, 5 to 10 degrees below normal. Greens are going to be more like 10 to 15 degrees below normal. And when we're talking about a 15-day period, that is significant because it's taking the average of all of those. And I mean, absolutely crazy stuff here. Let's dive into the European model first off, as we tend to do. This is the 12Z run from today on January 18th, and we can see first off we have a potential winter storm that we're watching in kind of this corridor. I guess it's a little bit wide. It's mostly going to be for these areas kind of here, and that's where we're watching for a significant winter storm that's taking place a little bit sooner. So we're talking mostly in terms of tomorrow, so Sunday mostly, into a bit of Monday for that potential, not even potential at this point, but almost definite major snow system. The second one that we're going to be watching for will come in around Tuesday into Wednesday, Monday for some folks, and we see we're going to get snowfall in southern Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and maybe stretching a bit northward for some of these areas, or will it be closer to the coast? That's the bigger question mark here, but that's our main area of concern for that bigger snow system. There is some threats afterwards that we're going to discuss as well, so let's just move through here. And as we take a look at the day tomorrow, our first winter storm gets going, and again, low offshore here. Lots of rainfall here along the southeast, and then we see areas more along the kind of area between the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic. So we're talking eastern Ohio, eastern Kentucky, western Virginia, West Virginia itself, western Maryland, into bits of Pennsylvania. Initially here, this is again by 1 p.m. tomorrow on Sunday the 19th. As we move a few hours forward, we see heavy snowfall spreading in through northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland, the Philadelphia area, so like southeast and overall eastern Pennsylvania in general. into New Jersey, New York City, Long Island. We do see also southern New England getting quite a bit of heavy snowfall as this one moves through. And by Monday morning, it should be wrapping up. This will be 10 a.m. on Monday. We're left with very, very cold air. This is about, let's move to 60 hours from this initial run. And we're starting to get the development for our next winter system already. Some snowfall showers across Kansas and Oklahoma to start things out. We're going to start to see the snowfall start up in this pocket very quickly. So let's take a look. By the time we're reaching about, this is going to be 4 a.m. on Tuesday, January 21st. That is Eastern time, by the way. We do see snowfall throughout Texas, Louisiana, portions of New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. But the heaviest corridor would be here in this more central Texas area into Louisiana as we're getting going. We do see this kind of dip southward, and we start to get snowfall along that Texas coast, along the Louisiana coastline, and that does expand pretty far inland. We have seen a bit of an inland trend with this storm, where we have seen the model showing areas further west and further north seeing that snowfall, especially the heavier stuff, which has been different than we've seen over the last few days. Obviously, as we get closer to systems, it is kind of classic for there to be a bit of a northwesterly trend, so we do expect that to be a possibility still moving forward, so an even further northwest movement. Let's go ahead and move this forward towards about 10 p.m. on Tuesday, and this is when the snowfall starts to spread eastward. Again, it's a little further inland. We're seeing areas throughout central Georgia, even northern Georgia, central South Carolina, and most of North Carolina seeing snowfall by late on Tuesday night. As we reach towards about 4 a.m. on Wednesday morning, January 22nd, we see heavy snowfall along the southeast coast, even expanding up into the mid-Atlantic like the Delmarva and New Jersey here, maybe even as far northward and northwestward as DC, seeing some snowflakes flying. But the heart of it being over North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina here on the eastern end. We do see this one kind of slide off eventually, so the day on Wednesday will be very cold, but kind of snowless by this point. We see a lack of precipitation by the time we're reaching Wednesday afternoon. Your next potential snow system does not start out in the Western Gulf. And matter of fact, we see it kind of originate here off the southeast coast. There's plenty of cold air still around for all of these areas, and we see a low that wants to kind of form and move up the east coast. This does pose a threat for basically the entire mid-Atlantic and northeast, especially coastline, but also areas inland. This poses a threat to almost everybody. As we keep going with this, we do see this snowfall event start to get going for areas of North Carolina and Virginia. Again, we're about 5 to 6 days away from this one, so we are in the medium, almost moving into shorter range with this one. So confidence is growing that there will be a snowfall threat after our first two. Again, I told you guys this weeks ago, but we did expect to move into a very snowy pattern for the mid to late point of January, and that is really, really coming true as long as a lot of this verifies. But it looks like we're within a good range to consider most of these as high probability. We do see that snow gets heavy for a moment, but the low is pretty well offshore. I mean, we see this low hundreds of miles offshore, and we get just a little exclusive East Coast snowfall. If this snow event trended a little further west, we would be pretty much game on for these areas for a massive snow event. Again, a lot of our systems have been trending northwest, and not only that, a lot of our systems, even as they're happening, have been occurring almost further northwest than the models are showing. So not even just a northwest trend, but basically the last model run before the snow is actually happening, the snow actually happens a little further northwest than that final model run as well. So northwest is kind of the trend, and I think that that could be the case with this one. Nothing's guaranteed, but that would bode well in that area. This is when we start to get milder right after this point, 26th, 27th. We finally kind of break away and get a southeast ridge here, so some warmer air influencing things. I would say it's neutral to above normal. It's not crazy above normal, but it is going to feel like a very considerable jump from what we had been seeing. Definitely a really, really big warm up when you're considering that we were 30, 40 degrees below normal before this point. We do see colder air and more snowfall starting to move into the west, so that could be what the Climate Prediction Center was kind of watching for. And then we start to get these central storms going, so some lows in this area with thunderstorms, showers in here, maybe even severe weather for your more central plains could be interesting towards the end of January. And we see that kind of cold front sweep across the south central and southeast. We see the 998 there. Strong cold front look, warm front corridor. So there is warmth and humidity spreading in. This is now bordering on pretty well above average probably for these areas as far as temperatures are concerned. We see these thunderstorms move eastward all the way through the southeast regions of the nation before we get another little bit of a cold blast here to end January. Positive P&A looks to be sort of making a comeback, and this cold air as a result kind of just moves around that into the east, which we see almost every single time. As we move a little bit further forward, we do continue to see some cold air, but it looks like we could be seeing this go ahead and move out, and we could see the warm air pushing more eastward as it's been doing these last couple hours. So my overall consensus here is that we are cold here for the next, probably till next Thursday, Friday, Saturday time frame. And then we're going to move into a back and forth pattern where it's cold, warm, a little bit more standard for what you'd expect during a winter time. We have been seeing cold temperatures, some areas seeing colder temperatures than they've ever seen this January. It has been historically cold for many folks, and we're going to move back into something that is much more standard. Again, I don't expect a full-blown torch like we've seen the last 4 winters, even after the 25th, but I think we're going to move into a back and forth pattern, which once again is quite normal. As we take a peek here at the GFS model, we see that we get our initial snowstorm looks maybe a little bit more major there for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. That one moves out. This snowstorm for the deep south is further southeast than the European model shows it, which shouldn't come as a surprise. Oftentimes the GFS model is too far to the southeast. It has a southeast bias, which tells us that typically in the medium range, it's showing things a little too far to the southeast, and oftentimes they do trend northwestward, especially on this model, although all of them tend to do that sometimes. The GFS model is the most because it's typically the furthest southeast. So to get to what it's eventually going to be, it has to move even further to the north. But there has been occasions where we've seen it be correct with these southeast events, and it's really not the southeast bias, but actually what's going to happen. So we have to just consider it as a possibility still, with the kind of caveat that it has a southeast bias in mind. We move past this. We get this kind of East Coast threat here, a little bit more prominent for a lot of areas for North Carolina, Virginia, Delmarva, New Jersey, into southern New England. Still not perfect, as far as what snow lovers in these areas would probably want, but a lot closer to a major hit than the European model. That's something that we're going to monitor over the coming days. We do see the cold air kind of continue after the 25th, and then we kind of get the warm air spreading in for the 29th, 30th, 31st here. Where we move back into that kind of back and forth pattern for the end of January, beginning of February timeframe. Now, as we take a look at the total precipitation on the European model, really a big uptick for most areas in the eastern half of the nation, also the Northwest seeing a big uptick. Those are the two kind of hot spots here, and we do see some above average precipitation in the Northwest and Rockies, and then also for the southern plains up into the Mid-Atlantic, but really all of these areas are semi-decent as far as precipitation is concerned. Now, for the total snowfall on the European model, we would see a few pockets with this deep south snowstorm that would be, 6 to 10 inches perhaps for areas of Texas, Louisiana, southern Mississippi, then also South Carolina, North Carolina, and southern Virginia there being the two bullseyes. This could trend north and westward. That would likely increase overall totals. Keep that in mind. A more intense system would likely move further north into the jet stream. A weaker system would slide by to the south. So the further north this thing gets pushed, likely the bullseyes would increase in totals as they also move north and westward. If it trends south from here, you would see lesser totals. So probably no 6 to 10, maybe like 4 to 6, maybe 4 to 7 inches in the bullseyes if we saw a more southern, weaker trend. Your snowstorm for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast will be a pretty healthy, 4, 5, 6 inches, even upwards of 6, 7, 8. Some areas in New England, and especially high elevation areas, likely will see 10 inches plus from that event possibly. So could be a pretty major one. As we take a zoomed in look, this is kind of the overall snowfall look over the next 2 weeks. GFS model obviously a little weaker, as I mentioned, with the snowfall totals and a little further south. So that kind of plays into what I was just talking about. As we take a look at the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast with the more sooner storm, I guess that's a bad way to put it, but the snowstorm that is happening before the deep south one, again 6 to 10, maybe some 10-inch plus amounts for the mountains in there, wouldn't surprise me one bit. Here's that kind of eastern view just so you can see the amounts on screen. Again, much further suppressed here for the Carolinas and much less amounts. We're talking 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 inches for some folks. So a far cry from that 6 to 10-inch area that would set up with the European model's more northerly track. Canadian model does agree with the European model for sure if it was between the GFS and the European. I should tell you that the Canadian model has a tendency to show these southern stream storms being a little too intense, which again can pull it further northward, because if it thinks the storm's going to be stronger, again, it plays into that jet stream a little bit more and trends north. So this could be a little too far northwest. It could be spot on. I know that with this system that's happening here in a lot of the east, it's still showing it too far to the northwest, but it was one of the models that was showing it closer to what it was going to be before the GFS and European model were on board. That's part of why I'm showing it today, is it has had some recent success with certain systems. So definitely something to think about, but similar areas for the bullseyes. I mean, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Carolinas, and then up into Virginia, perhaps. The European model had it a little further south, I would say, with the bullseye, but still kind of a similar idea. As we take a look at the overall temperature pattern, again, we're a little warmer right now, but this cold air is coming in hot. Here's Monday. Again, kind of purplish blues are very, very, very far below normal. The magentas are extremely below normal, almost bordering on like record breaking for some folks. So we see that around for Monday. Tuesday as well, that's around. Wednesday, that's along the southeast coast and up into the mid-Atlantic. Thursday, we still have some of that left over for the east. I mean, even Friday, some below normal temperatures. We get a brief warm up here for the 26th, 27th, some cool downs. So again, that back and forth pattern. Here's that day that's very far above normal. We're talking 20, 30 degrees above normal there, up and down the eastern seaboard, perhaps, to end out January if this European model is correct. But we do get another cool down that moves in, followed by perhaps another warm up coming in. So again, that back and forth look is kind of how I see the models in the long range right now. GFS model is going to agree to a certain extent. We do see the far below normal temperatures for the coming days, warm up in between, cool down here for the 26th, 27th, 28th, and we really see the warmth struggle to move in until the 31st on this model, where we get a cold blast there for the immediate mid-Atlantic and northeast areas before we warm up again. So both models showing that back and forth. I think that could be a safe bet for what to expect as we move into late January, early February, but only time will tell. Anyway, we're going to be tracking all of these things and learning more, so be sure to subscribe as we do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.